Hey everybody, Breakthrough Health and Life Coach Glenn Hattem here. I'm here with my good friend William Kaiser. He's someone that I've experienced such a tremendous impact in how I've been able to navigate some of the difficult challenges of the entrepreneurial path. And also just as being a soulful being in the world who wants to tread lightly, wants to so I see myself as someone who wants to make a positive difference in the world, and that difference having to start with myself. And when I first connected with William years back, I think we just said it's probably been about 15 years. I was in a place of deep exploration outside of myself and investigating ways to get answers that I just I couldn't access on my own. And I think this conversation today, if you got a pen and paper handy, you'll take some really great notes as Will and I dive into a little bit of his unique story, his path, and how there are a lot of common themes for all of us that I think would be very helpful to our audience here, as well as I think there's probably some edgy stuff in here too that people that wish wasn't part of the process, but it is. And so I think that's probably a good place to start. Maybe William, just a little bit of an introduction to just kind of who you are, where you're at in life now. And then what I like to do is just kind of backtrack to like, where did all this begin? And we'll take a walk back in time. But I'll just leave with one note that when we first spoke on the phone, I think we connected through LinkedIn, and I'm trying to remember the exact, but I remember I'm like, I don't know if this guy's for real. He sounds too proper. His accent. I'm like, I feel like maybe there's some guy in India that's scamming me right now, perhaps, because this guy is too real, like too perfect to show up this way. And I found that to be a luxury for me to have connected with someone like you so early on in my career. It made a difference at a we'll use the word at a pivotal point. So.
Well, to start with, I'm 83. So I've had a long life, and we haven't got 8 hours to bore people with all the twists and turns. But clearly from my accent, I was born in the UK before the war, Second World War, that is. Moved to the US in 1946, though my oldest ancestor emigrated to the US in 1640 to New Amsterdam, as it was then. But I have a family background of entrepreneurs on both sides of my family tree, as it were. I mean, all sorts of strange things like clockmaking, scrap metal, banking, rope manufacturing. But my parents were people who wanted to change the world for the better. So I won't bore you with them, but my dad, for example, was employee number 31 of the United Nations in 1946. Wow. But they'd been in refugee work. They'd been in something called the Peace Pledge Union, which came before the UN itself, and so on. Anyway, enough of that. There it was in my background. Not that I was aware of it as a kid, obviously, but I did. My first entrepreneurial effort was at 9 years old, standing on the side of 25A on Long Island, selling lilies of the valley to Manhattan people returning after a weekend on the North Shore. So it sort of happened. It wasn't intentional.
Well, myself, just a note, I was the one who didn't sell lemonade. I sold Star Wars action figures with their heads blown off. I had a table set up in front of my house, and that was where my entrepreneurship, probably around similar age,
Yeah, the funny thing is, I notice 3 of my 5 children are entrepreneurs, not inspired by me at all. I mean, they're in very different things in very different parts of the world. But even I have a step grandson who's 6, who loves making cookies with grandma, and he wanted to make money because his 3 elder siblings have jobs, although they range in age from 15 to 20. And he went with her to the street corner outside our house and sold the cookies they'd made one day for $30.
Wow. He's sold. He's like, I'm doing this for every day should be like this, probably.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it helps probably in an entrepreneurial journey if you haven't come from a long line of I don't know, civil servants or plumbers. Well, maybe plumbers actually would be good because most plumbers work on their own. But
so
anyway,
you would say that it's a bloodline. There's a bloodline.
yeah.
So
I have a suspicion that may be the case.
My grandfather was the inventor of the supermarket, like the actual first place. Yeah, in Los Angeles was one of like the tallest buildings, you know, in the city at the time. But way back in the day, it's first place to grab your basket and get everything all in one spot. So
I feel like there's a curiosity. I mean, I get madly inflamed with modern technology, especially computer technology, even though I run a website and everything. But I always want to find the answer. I drive people mad, and I'm probably rude and beastly in trying to find out. But I want to fix it, and I think probably entrepreneurs are like that. I've worked for several years, not as long ago as when we met, but with a founder of the Institute of Entrepreneurial Development, grand name, in Botswana in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm been the strategic advisor there for many years. But there he is in Botswana, Africa. He's educated and all that, but he's tried this and tried that. And then since he set up the Institute, it's been an amazing thing to watch, because he's mission driven, he's purpose driven. He's not doing it to make a fortune. He just believes that Botswana will have a brighter future and less dependent on diamonds, which their economy has been, by helping people start activities that are going to be of benefit to the nation. And his latest venture is mind-blowing. He's developed a very complex kidpreneur program, since we both talked about being entrepreneurs young. But it's for training kids, I think, I can't remember, 8 to 15 or something. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I think there are 8 learning sessions with this book that I didn't work on. I wrote the introduction and all that, but it's all his work. And it's compelling, because it could actually be a huge impact on the economy of Botswana, and probably other English-speaking African nations too, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Wow. So I mean, I've been lucky enough to meet people like that all my life. I mean, I went to school in the US and then back in England, and I was living in France, actually working on a farm as a farm laborer, and I was called up for military service. My dad said, "It's your duty, you must come back." I said, "I don't damn well want to come back." Anyway, I did, and was in military intelligence, which took me to live in Germany. At the end of that, I thought, well, I speak French, I'm going to go to university in France. So I went, and I dropped out because I met a girl and we were going to do things and blah, blah, blah. But I did lots of growing up kind of jobs, bookselling, fence erecting. I tried freelance journalism, cab driving. And then when I was working in a bookselling job, I met a woman and we were going to get married, and Dad very nicely said, I think you better get a proper job. So I got a proper job. It happened to be in business. I'd always sworn that I would never go into business. I was going to be the great novelist. Anyway, I worked through with various entrepreneurs till I was headhunted by a French multinational who were looking for a French speaker in London who could work with the chief executive of their British subsidiary. It happened to be in management consulting. I did have commercial experience. I had worked in marketing, but that took me in a different direction, because it took me into a place where I could be much more curious and much more inventive with my clients. And not long after I joined the company, I was seconded for 2 years to the British government in national economic development. Again, that took me into places. I don't have any economics qualifications or experience.
Well, question here. So when you're in that space where you're like a lot of folks, when they may move up in a company into a different role position, and they're like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to find out I'm a fraud. You know, I don't know. Like and we often find ourselves stretching ourselves. You know, we're riding the edge of growth, and sometimes we're like, gosh, I'm not quite acclimated yet or suited for this position. And how am I going to pull this off in the meantime? And I'm just curious about that. Maybe you can recall that, like that experience, what it's like. And because that's just such a common space for a lot of us entrepreneurs, which it's all about stretching yourself.
Sure.
Even with me shooting videos. So
that was a huge stretch, because I can't remember what age exactly. I was like 32, maybe 33 at that time. And it so happened I met the Director General of the National Economic Development Office, and he needed a Director of Public Affairs. And I don't know, he offered me the job. I said, well, I'm set on another course. And he said, well, can't they lend you to us for a couple of years, which is what they did. So that the government paid my salary into the company I worked for, but I got my salary from the company. But that took me into all sorts of really mind-boggling situations. I mean, I sat down every month after the monthly meeting with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer to explain to the press what we've been up to. And I was a kid, really. I mean, and I was in a government position that actually broke the rules for what age you had to be in that position. So it was a senior position in civil service, and I was too young for it. Then when I got there in Westminster, because of my rank, I had this huge office overlooking the Thames and the Houses of Parliament and all that. Embarrassing to me in a way. And I said, look, there's too much furniture in here. And the office manager said, no, but that's what you get for being this level. I said, well, I don't drink in the office, so I certainly don't want the drinks cabinet. It had a sort of like boardroom table with, I don't know, 10 chairs. I said, I don't envisage having meetings. Can't we get rid of that so I've got a bit more space? No, you couldn't do that. Well, I spoke to my boss, Director General he was, Sir Fred Catherwood, and he said, yeah, of course you can. I'll tell them to take the stuff out. And he was like, I was fortunate to have a boss who who was not an entrepreneur. He'd been the chief executive of a major construction firm before he went into this job. And I had the most beautiful, glamorous secretary who used to wear, fashion designer clothes. And
So you had your money penny.
yeah, and she came in one day wearing hot pants. Well, this is 1960s anyway, I can't remember when. Again, the office manager came into my office and said, look, you've got to tell her to dress appropriately. And I said, oh, if you say so. But I was chatting to my boss, and he said, for goodness sake, no, she's the Betty Grable of the 15th floor. So I realized you could break rules. And then
I'm sure your boss really appreciated, Will, that you're someone that just asks, hey, just because we've done this doesn't mean we need to. And that's the entrepreneurial spirit. It's like,
yeah,
has anyone ever questioned this box and operated outside this box of thinking? Because maybe things could be done better from that starting point.
Well, I was told, because I wasn't a career civil servant and I had no experience of the civil service, we did huge studies of how to change industries in the UK. And we published great fat reports. And it struck me that they were great. They were really great. But they weren't promoted. They were published by Her Majesty's Stationery Office. So they were official, documents. But teams of people worked for like 2 years to study the machine tool industry or something. And these reports were read by about 15 people. So I said, why don't we have an advertising budget? And I was told, oh no, you can't do that. Our superior office was the Treasury, which is like the Ministry of Finance, because we were in economic development. And they said, oh, the Treasury will never back that idea. The government doesn't advertise. And I said, but we're trying to develop the economy of a country, and we're doing this wonderful work, and nobody knows about it. They said, no, they'll never approve. So I said, watch me. So I went to the Treasury. I didn't know anybody in the Treasury, or I didn't have any connections. And I explained, well, first of all, what I did is I found out, how do they do budgets in the Treasury? And I found out that, you had to present a case and a sort of paper, and it had to show good reason. So I prepared a paper that showed good reason, and I got a budget of, I don't know, seemed huge in those days. It was £10,000 or something. And nobody could believe it when I said to colleagues back in the office, well, I've got this money, now we're going to advertise. So it showed things were possible all the time. Anyway, enough of that.
Well, just emphasizing that, I think there's something that I recognize in myself. You could call it a stubbornness, but it's really the watch me. Someone tells me you can't do something, that entrepreneurial spirit, that drive is like, just because it hasn't been done before, and you tell me I can't do something, or it's not likely. Oh boy, you just gave me everything I need. That's actually what the entrepreneur kind of fills his backpack with nothing and goes like out on an adventure and says like, I'm gonna like defy the odds, the weather, the conditions. I'm not and I often tell that with clients that I go out and run in the heat of the day, or I was up in the mountains and there was a white squall coming in, and of course that's when I'm going running. when the gates close and it's deep snow up to your hips, it's like, I'm gonna go do that crazy thing. And there's something about crazy, because as an entrepreneur, I almost feel like the normal is crazy, like it's batshit crazy. And if I don't do
well, I think Yeah, I absolutely agree about the, snow up to your waist analogy. I think quite honestly, to be successful, you need to have a real passion for your purpose, not a passion. Sorry, we'll just let that ring. Not a passion. It's my daughter. You're not saying, I want to get rich quick. Most of those guys tumble, or women. It's much more about, I see something that could be improved, or I see something that's wrong, or I see a better way of doing things, and that's your motivation. So my website, for example, is called Venture Founders, and that's another story. It's about showing to people that if you have a real purpose in the business and you respect and meet the needs of all your stakeholders, so, the environment, the employees, this, that, all the various bits that affect your business, actually, profits won't actually drop out of the bottom. I mean, it's not that you don't want to be profitable. You're not a charity. But it's doing something good that will produce the result. So if you produce a crappy motor car, nobody's going to buy it. You're going to have to want to really make the best vehicle for the purpose. So that was I think that was the turning point, my 2 years in government. And because I could see that even in the stuffiest, rolled umbrellas and bowler hat world of civil service Britain in the 60s, you could actually get things done. And so when I went back to my French multinational management consulting company, I was dissatisfied with what I was doing before. And I said, I'm going to leave. I've got things to do, places to go. And the thing that was exciting me most of all was seeing how ownership of companies was not the issue. In that time in Europe, there was a massive amount of public ownership of enterprise, so nationalized industry. And I had this vision of trying to explain that it wasn't the ownership that it was the issue, it was the way the business was managed. So the culture, the processes, and all that. And I believed that I could have an impact there. And I got on a plane, I went to Brussels, and cutting again a long story short, I convinced them that they should hire me to do a study in all the then members of the EU of public enterprise, because they had a division of public enterprise in Brussels, but they didn't really know what was going on the ground. So what we did was this, I think it was 9 countries at the time, study. I put together a team of academics in every country, but at the beginning they said, well, the quote, I don't think the Commission will buy that quote, it's too high. There was a huge amount of work to be done. And I said, oh, well, let's see if we can find an alternative way of covering the cost. And I came up with the idea of, oh, well, if I can find a publisher for the ultimate books that are going to be produced, reports, I could get some income from there to add to what the EU Commission would pay me. Mm-hmm. And indeed, cutting a long story short, that's what I did. I found a publisher in Holland. And we produced 7 volumes. We put some countries together at the end of the day, and I got the price that it would have been had the client paid the whole lot. But actually the commission paid like 2/3 and the publisher gave me royalties of about 1/3 of the cost. So, you know, that was, it wouldn't have come about had I not had the experience in the British Civil Service. And what it did was, I now really wanted to leave my company and set up on my own, a real business. I'd tried various things before and they'd not worked.
And now you're starting to feel ready.
Yeah. And so by the time I think I was 42, which is probably the age at which, the biggest sort of age point at which people start businesses. You know, they're not old and decrepit like I am now. They had energy, but they had experience too. So anyway.
And this is probably very painful for any of the followers that are in your 20s who want to get rich quick and become a YouTube influencer or whatnot. And you know, it's like there's something about the steady path and the compounding effect and the skills that get honed over time.
Yeah.
But having been 20 at one time and it had a number of, you know, I had everything from an auto detail business when I was in college, where I would actually go to the sorority houses with had my water tank in the back of my truck, and I'd hire a bunch of fraternity guys to come over and work and then have dinner with the gals afterwards. It was, oh my gosh, I've struck gold. This is going to be my, you know, my thing here. I think all of us have that that drive to want to get some immediate satisfaction. But as you've spoken and shared, it's like there's a lot of things that are happening for you and honing you.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I said to my boss in the French company, I want to leave. He said, well, why leave? Why don't you set up a new subsidiary to do this? The idea was I got the experience of working with academics. I was a commercial person, management consultant in business. Why don't you set up a new subsidiary of the company? And I said, yeah, but I want to do it for me, you know, my thing. He said, well, that's fine. You can set up a new office. We can give you phantom shares. I'd never heard of the idea. So we had this agreement we drew up where I owned, I think it was 49% of the equity of this subsidiary. I don't think he told the French bosses that he was doing it, the English boss. Anyway, we did that and set it up, and it went for, I don't know, 5-6 years probably, and it worked pretty well. We moved from London. We set up the new subsidiary in Oxford. I used academics, some of whom are still friends today. And we did consulting work in areas which were on the boundary between business and social. So they were very much about people. And anyway, that went, and then finally I set up with my partner my own business in 1982. But we wanted it to be a very different sort of business where everybody in the company was as important as everybody else. I mean, we were the owners of the company, but we wanted it to be demanding, fun, interesting, diverting, and profitable. That's what we did. The company, we changed the name. It ultimately became Mosaic, and we created Mosaic Law. And everybody was given a sort of coffee mat. It was made of granite, and it looked like a tombstone. And I'm looking away from you at one I still have on my desk, Mosaic Law. So Mosaic was the name of the company because we did all sorts of interesting different things. And Mosaic Law because the laws of Moses, you know, tablets down from the mountain and all that.
Yeah, no, I really love the list.
Okay.
Reviewing those.
But
Hopefully, I'll share those. Yeah.
Even back then, we were talking about people and profits. Number 1 was people and profits, and number 10 was people and profits. So we weren't saying we're going to be the biggest, the best, etc. Anyway, we set it up. It worked very well. We grew to about 30 people, and I was exhausted. It was 11 years we ran the company. Mm-hmm. And during that time, at one point we were outgrowing our offices, and I had a banker for the company, and he was always very worried about the risk he was taking because we had no assets to speak of. We were a brainware company, a vaporware company. Mm-hmm. And he kept on for probably 2 or 3 years saying, you really ought to invest in real estate. You know, can't you buy an office? Because then, you know, you have something on your balance sheet. Well, I understood what a balance sheet was, but it didn't seem important. It was only to satisfy his bosses that he wasn't constantly, you know, providing money to a business that had nothing on its balance sheet. So if it went fut, you know, they'd be holding the baby. Yeah. So yes, we did finally, we were persuaded and we bought an old English country house and mortgaged by the bank heavily. And the sad thing is that finally, when I'd had enough of that, I was 52, 53, something like that. And we sold the company to, I tried to see if I could find a commercial buyer, and that hasn't really come off.
We're interested, yeah.
But we sold the company to the 30 or so people who worked in the company, but not for a huge sum of money, for a symbolic £1 Welsh pound sterling. So we could basically walk away. I had terrible trouble with the tax people because they couldn't believe somebody would sell a profitable company for £1 sterling. But anyway, what was really sad, or what is really sad, is that not long after we'd sold the company, it went bust. Why did it go bust? Because the mortgage payments were killing the company. They didn't need this fancy office, although it impressed the clients no end.
It wasn't necessary.
It wasn't necessary. We had our offices before had been in an old converted brewery, and they were fine. It was cramped, but we still did the same work. So I find that the traditional ways of doing business are wanting. You know, if you say, I mean, there are some financial things that I learned early on, like, why do you need to grow? Well, you need to grow because you need to be able to replace assets or people or research or things that will make you have a longer life as a business. But the idea of grow, you know, till you're dominant is, I don't find that exciting or interesting or necessary. Once you get quoted on the stock market, then probably you have got a hell of an uphill task convincing shareholders that in their best interests in the long term, you do good things rather than make lots of money. It's easier if you're a private enterprise.
Right.
But anyway, that was how it went. And then, so at 52 or 53, I moved to the island of Corsica in the Mediterranean, and I felt lost. I didn't know what I was doing. But then I met people, and I loved living there, and I loved the country. And I got to be on the board of a venture capital company that was, again, mission-driven, purpose-driven. It was about this rather poor Mediterranean island changing the way that they worked. So they weren't sort of kowtowing to the French government of Paris. The island belongs to France. Mm-hmm. They had some life of their own. Now it was connected, of course, with, to some extent, the nationalists of the country, but basically it was about the people of Corsica having a better time. And so it was about increasing employment. If we could invest in enterprises, we could help them provide employment to people. And some were successful, some were abject failures. I mean, probably the biggest success we had was setting up a Corsican brewing company, or rather, other people we invested. There was one that was a sandwich company that I had to supervise. That went fut.
Why do you think on that? It's always interesting to hear about successes, but it's even more interesting to hear for folks the failures, the things that you.
Well, I think the failure, again, what my experience tells me, the failure there was the guy who started it was very energetic and was in the catering field.
Okay.
And he could see that with all the tourism was the biggest industry. With all the tourists, you know, people wanted a quick lunch, they'd want ready prepared sandwiches.
Yeah.
So basically, it was a good idea. But he got together with this guy who was an accountant. And in my view, the accountant killed the company. Because he was always looking for the franc. He was not looking for, how can we make these sandwiches more interesting or more culturally appropriate to the country, or how can our distribution system work better?
So I wasn't thinking about the experience.
No. And he sat in his office. He never left his office.
So how did that squash kind of the other person's energy and drive? And
well, I think
vision.
He probably got to a point where he wanted to just move on. Sandwich is not very exciting, is it?
Right.
You know. So, but anyway, so I did that, and I was on other boards, and I ran a radio station, not a for-profit one, a little local radio station, things like that. I got to a point where I needed to move on again, so I moved back to the US. All this time, I was helping others I think, do what they wanted to do in terms of building an enterprise of some sort, which is how I got to meet you. Because again, I think I had a website then, and maybe it was through the website or somebody introduced us. I can't even remember. But that's what I have been doing since then. And it's taken me into all sorts of interesting places. I was on board of a big, very successful food co-op, retail food co-op in Vermont. Worked in restorative justice. I worked as a night guardian in a homeless shelter. All sorts of things which I'm ashamed I don't do anymore. And then in due course, I met a man who had started an MBA, which was right up my alley. It was called an MBA in Managing for Sustainability. Mm-hmm. So we were one of the 3 pioneering schools who were saying, wait a minute, there's a different way of doing things. And I'd never taught anything to anybody, really. I mean, I'd mentored and helped and coached, but he convinced me that I could do this job. And I thought, oh my God, you know, the role of professor, mortarboards and gowns, and I don't know how to do that. Well, what I found out was it's not a great con, but it's not that complex. You have to know what you want to teach. You have to build a syllabus. You have to understand arcane things like credit hours and so on. But it's not rocket science if you want to teach. And I'm still sad that I didn't find out about that instead of at 69. I didn't find out about it at 29 because I love teaching, and did that, teaching new venture creation and what was called sustainable strategy for 7 years. So I retired again at 77. A lot of mentoring of students. A lot of them have set up their own businesses of various sorts.
Well, you know, I often quote Richard Rohr, who talks about, you know, this book, Falling Upwards, just how like the first half of the life, you know, we feel we're very compelled to go out and create this identity. And we develop this character and this way in the world, and we stack on all these rules and ways. And now we filter the world very limited through these things.
Yeah.
And then the second half of life, we discover we've only got so many more Wednesdays left.
Yeah.
And in that, what's going to be our legacy? What are we going to leave behind? And it becomes very clear that all the rules of the first half of life don't really apply for the second half of life. And we have to see those castles that were built in the sand come crumbling down, so to speak. And you've clearly had a very similar path to mine in the sense of it's almost a gypsy lifestyle of following the next thing you bump into, and then it takes you here, and you find yourself on an island, and you find yourself with people here, and you find yourself navigating these different trains that all kind of lead back to, you know, why we're all here. What's our calling? What's our truth? What can we share from these stories, these experiences that will help others find an access point through our share with themselves to lean in and go off their crazy cliff, their crazy adventure.
Yeah.
That's what we all need to be doing, is doing
But you
our
can't
thing.
tell. It's not a tell thing. You can't tell people, you know, do what I did.
Right.
Like when we had the business, we set up, there was a very good consulting company in Sweden that we liked, and we liked what they did. It was working particularly in the field of entrepreneurship, actually. And Sven Atterhead, the founder of this company, set up a network of companies in other countries of like mind. Anyway, we had joined that network. It was called the Foresight Network. Well, it still is. It still works. And so he was a bit of an inspiration to me, I must say. And he called one day and said, "Hey, Solveig, his wife, and I are going to a conference in a spiritual centre in the north of Scotland."
Okay.
And the title of the conference is Intuitive Leadership.
Okay.
And we were intrigued. So yeah, we'll go. It was, I think, a week. We lived in this community. It's called the Findhorn Foundation.
Findhorn
Anyway,
Foundation. Okay.
We did all sorts of crazy things, like I don't know. What I remember graphically is we were shut in a room in the dark, absolute total darkness,
Okay.
with 6 other, well, there were 6 of us in the room. And we had to stay there for 2 hours in the dark. And then we came out and then we shared our experiences with other people. So it was that kind of activity, and there was outside activity. It was beautiful, beautiful part of Scotland on the coast. And it was there that I was first introduced to meditation. And that was 30 plus years ago. Well, I still have a meditation practice, and I don't really talk about it or anything, but that fitted into what I was about, which was having a positive effect on the world I inhabit. And it's not because I want a legacy or anything like that. It's just that's, so my website, when we met, I was charging people money. I don't do that. I haven't done it for many years. And the website isn't commercial. Its design is to encourage, inspire others. And I meet through it, I meet all sorts of interesting people. There's a young, well, he's not that young, but he's a PhD student in Hamburg, Malt Krohn, who wrote a book called, whoops.
Mindful Start. I like that title.
Startup, because he's on a similar journey. He says it's a wholehearted guide through the mindful and compassionate entrepreneurial journey. And
what's his name one more time for the audience?
M-A-L-T-E, Malt Krohn, K-R-O-H-N, Malt Krohn.
Okay.
And anyway, Malt, we correspond and share things, and in fact, I'm going to do a review of the book, but I wouldn't have met him had did I not have my website, and we had a medium through which we could communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Now one of the things I push on my website is something called a business model canvas.
Okay.
I may even have talked to you about
kind of like a lean canvas type thing.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Well, the lean canvas is a version of the business model canvas.
Yep.
Well, Malt has developed. It looks incredibly simple, but in the middle of I probably can't find it. Oh yes, here we are. In the middle of the canvas, normally there is a value proposition.
Okay.
All right. The value proposition is the concept of saying, what value am I going to deliver, and why and how am I going to deliver it? So what's the value that people are going to get by some kind of interaction, whether commercial or otherwise, with the company? He has divided, it sits in the middle of this canvas in which you work out your strategy. And in the middle where the value proposition sits, he has kind of divided it roughly in half, and the other half is your purpose. Why would you do this? Not what is it that you're going to do, but why? What's the driver?
This driver is also why people want to get on board with you and why they want to come to you, work with you, and see you as a resource. Right.
So all I'm saying is, even now, when I'm not trying to have a business at all, I'm meeting these people who are much cleverer than me, and they're wanting to change the world through startup, through business, through entrepreneurial activity, because you can, and anybody can. Anybody can. Like my guy in Botswana. So that still at 83 has me trying to figure out boring things like search engine optimization so that I can make my website have more visitors.
I think that's a good place for us to probably wrap up today.
Yep.
I think the emphasis that I'm hearing from you, from your journey, like the real nugget of wisdom that our audience hopefully has taken some notes, as I've taken a bunch, is just that the entrepreneurial path is the way to change the world, and anyone can. Anyone, and you can still be doing it retired. The spirit of the entrepreneurship still is, is living through you now and will live after you.
Yeah,
it's just an expansive energy that's creative and has no boxed in boundaries. And maybe this book would even be a great resource of that Malt's offering, which is a means to figure out, like, what's your why? What's your mission driven? Well, I think you probably could sum up better than me summarizing up what you've shared today. But maybe just let's maybe in a minute we'll wrap things up here with this.
okay.
So what would you say?
Yeah, well, what I'd like to leave with people is there's something called the B Corp. I don't know whether you've encountered the B Corp. It's a movement. And in fact, my company, when it was commercial, Venture Founders, when it was seeking to earn money, was one of the 82 founder companies that was a B Corp. And the B Corp is, there are now, as a consequence of that, there's a legal structure you can have as a corporation. Just the shareholders, it's everybody. Okay. There probably is one in your neck of the woods too. It's in about probably half or 2/3 of the states, the US, you can register as a benefit corporation. Anyway, B Corp is really about showing how business can make real advances in the way we do things in the world. And it's people is at the core of it. And I would encourage any intending entrepreneur to look into what does it take to become a B Corp. It's now quite difficult. You have to go through a whole series of questions about how you do things, why you do things, as well as describing what your business is. So I would say that's a nice place to end, because it kind of encapsulates all the kinds of things that I've been talking about to you in this chat.
And then if anyone wants to just peer in to what you're up to in the world, what's your web address? How do they find you with the technology?
Very simple. Venture Founders. Okay. That's VENTURE, Venture Founders, FOUNDERS.com. And it's got hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff of various sorts, like directories of I don't know, co-working spaces you've probably heard of. I'm very much into co-working spaces. Well, I've got a directory of over 700 co-working spaces throughout the United States. But anyway, venturefounders.com.
And if anyone wants to have a chit chat, perhaps with is there a way to email you or get a hold of you through the website?
Through the website.
Through the website. Okay, great. I just want to say it's always a pleasure just to spend time with you, and we're going to have another conversation again. And I just wanted to again say that you've had such a tremendous impact on my life and my way in the world, and that's beyond just a few years after us starting to work together. I spent some time in a monastery in Thailand doing Vipassana meditation, and then continuing meditation retreats, and but so many other things outs of what you would think aren't part of the fold of the entrepreneurial path, but they're necessary components. And so I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and just appreciate everyone who's taken the time to stay with us and listen in and understand that each of us has a unique story to tell and share, an access point for others to do their work and relax into their mysterious path. We all have a mysterious, revealing, like Steve Jobs, talked about, oh, why did I take that calligraphy class? And then, the dots start to connect. Most of my journey has been like, gosh, I would have really appreciated a map going into this, but the map has kind of, I've often said that I read this Ram Dass book, and it was like the first book that was the map I needed years ago.
Yeah. Well, I never thought Outward Bound, which I did first at 15 and second at 69.
I wish I'd done
that. Would be such an influence on my life. I mean, I did, hiking and all the kind of things you do, but not to a degree that you do. But Outward Bound, again, it was, you're on the top of a tree on a ropes course, and you don't believe you can get across that rope to the next tree. And then you discover you can. Ooh. And that's Outward Bound as another big influence in my life. And I still, there's an Outward Bound called Thompson Island Outward Bound in Boston Harbor, which I still support through my website. They work with mainly underprivileged school kids in central Boston. Take them out to the island, and they have wild experiences. And I've been and seen those kids who come from really limited environments in the space, I forget how long they spend, a couple of weeks on the island. I mean, their vision goes like that.
Yes. I've had the pleasure of working with a number of, as you know, I've worked with an organization called Bridgemakers in Minneapolis. Just incredible, these are young adults that are going to change the world. And I had the pleasure just even this last summer bringing a bunch of them out to the mountains for some adventures, and just to open their eyes. And then when they got back to town, they got running, and it'll be exciting to see what kind of continues to expand with them. So it's always a privilege when you can open one's eyes to what's possible and say, yes, you can.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for being somebody who's very good at asking questions.
Sometimes. Well, I'm looking forward to spending more time with you again soon. I just want to say bye to everybody, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much. Just what a pleasure. So thank you.
And the same for me too.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.